October 14, 1948, 2:17 a.m. Apartment 4C, 62 West 115th Street. The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was softer, wetter, and infinitely more terrifying. It was the sound of a 6-inch boning knife sliding between the third and fourth ribs of a man who thought he was invincible. Bumpy Johnson stood in her kitchen, her silk nightgown spotted with bright arterial red. At her feet lay Salvatore Sal the Snake Moretti, one of the most feared hitmen in the Genovese crime family. He wasn't breathing, he was gurgling. Just 3 minutes earlier, Moretti had kicked down the service door, a suppressed .38 revolver in his hand, expecting to find a sleeping king he could execute in bed. He came for Bumpy Johnson. He came to decapitate the Harlem underworld. He thought the wife was just scenery, a detail, a witness to be silenced later. But now Moretti's gun was skittering across the linoleum floor. His hands were clutching his chest, and the woman he had dismissed was standing over him, not with a scream but with the cold, dead stare of an executioner. This wasn't just a home invasion. This was a message written in blood on a Harlem kitchen floor. The king of Harlem was dangerous, yes, but the queen, she was lethal. 3 weeks earlier, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was the tectonic plate upon which Harlem rested. By late 1948, he was more than a gangster, he was a one-man institution. He controlled the numbers racket, settled disputes the police wouldn't touch, and walked 125th Street like a monarch inspecting his dominion. He was a complex paradox, a man who could discuss the philosophy of Machiavelli over tea at the Lenox Lounge, then break a rival's arm in 3 places behind the Apollo Theater an hour later. He didn't just rule through fear, he ruled through intelligence. But even a genius has a blind spot. Harlem in 1948 was a pressure cooker of post-war ambition and racial tension. The uneasy alliance between the black numbers bankers and the Italian mafia was fracturing. The Genovese family, hungry for revenue after a crackdown on their downtown operations, looked north to Harlem's lucrative gambling profits. They didn't want a partnership anymore. They wanted a hostile takeover. Bumpy Johnson was the only wall standing between Harlem's independence and total Italian subjugation. The stakes were astronomical. An estimated $50,000 a week in untaxed revenue flowed through Bumpy's hands. But it was about more than money. It was about sovereignty. The Genovese bosses knew they couldn't beat Bumpy on the street. His soldiers were too loyal, his community too protective. If a strange car parked on 135th Street, Bumpy knew the license plate number within 10 minutes. They needed a bypass. They needed to hit him where his soldiers couldn't protect him. They needed to hit him at home. The architect of this assassination attempt was Capo Regime Lorenzo the Hammer Rizzuto. Rizzuto was a brute, a man who lacked the finesse of Lucky Luciano or the strategic mind of Frank Costello. He believed that any problem could be solved if you applied enough violence. His reputation was built on a massacre in a Brooklyn warehouse in 1945, where he had personally disposed of 3 Irish dockworkers who refused to pay protection money. Rizzuto didn't understand Harlem, and he didn't respect Bumpy Johnson. To him, Bumpy was just an obstacle to be bulldozed. Rizzuto wanted the entire Harlem numbers book. He wanted every dime from every policy slip sold from 110th to 155th Street. Bumpy had politely declined Rizzuto's offer of a 60-40 split in Rizzuto's favor during a tense sit-down at Small's Paradise just a week prior. Bumpy had laughed in his face, paid the tab, and walked out. That laughter signed the death warrant. Rizzuto was dangerous because he was impulsive and vindictive. He didn't care about the long-standing treaties between the 5 families and the Harlem syndicates. He had 15 shooters on his payroll and a green light from his underboss to resolve the situation. The threat came in the form of a dead canary wrapped in a newspaper, left on the doorstep of Bumpy's favorite tailor on Lenox Avenue. The message was clear. They weren't going to war in the streets. They were coming for the head of the snake. Rizzuto hired Salvatore Moretti, An outsider from New Jersey unknown to Bumpy's scouts for one reason, Moretti was a specialist in home invasions. October 14th, 2:05 a.m. The setup was simple, brutal, and flawed only by arrogance. Rizzuto's intelligence said Bumpy's bodyguards, the formidable Big Feets and Junie, changed shifts at 2 a.m. outside the apartment building. There was a glorious 3-minute window where the hallway would be empty. Moretti was to enter through the fire escape, quietly pick the lock of the service entrance, kill everyone inside, and leave before the next guard took his post. Inside apartment 4C, the air was still. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a police siren on 7th Avenue. The apartment smelled of lavender wax and the remnants of the roast chicken dinner Mamie had cooked hours before. Bumpy was asleep in the master bedroom. Mamie, however, was awake. She was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, unable to settle her nerves after the strange phone calls they'd received all week. 2:14 a.m. Mamie heard it. Not a knock, a metallic scratch at the service door lock. She froze. The glass of water in her hand didn't tremble. She set it down on the counter, silent. She looked at the knife block. The heavy German steel set Bumpy had bought her for their anniversary. She didn't scream for Bumpy. If she screamed, the intruder would fire blindly through the door. She reached out. Her fingers closed around the handle of the 6-inch boning knife. The wood felt cool. 2:15 a.m., the lock clicked. The doorknob turned. Mamie stepped back into the shadows of the pantry alcove. She pressed herself against the wall, becoming part of the darkness. She held the knife low, blade upward. The door creaked open. A sliver of hallway light cut across the kitchen floor. A shadow stepped in. Salvatore Moretti. He was huge, 6'2", wearing a dark trench coat. He moved with practiced silence, his gun raised, scanning the room. He looked left. He looked right. 2:16 a.m. Moretti took 2 steps into the kitchen. He was focused on the hallway leading to the bedroom. He didn't check the pantry. Why would he? He was the predator. He passed Mamie's hiding spot. He was less than 2 feet away. She could smell his cheap cologne and the gun oil. Mamie didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She lunged. 2:17 a.m. The movement was a blur. Mamie drove the knife upward with every ounce of strength in her body. The blade entered Moretti's side, just under the armpit, bypassing the ribs and piercing the lung. Moretti gasped, a wet, sucking sound. His eyes went wide. The shock was absolute. He tried to turn, tried to bring the gun around. Mamie twisted the handle. Moretti's knees buckled. The gun fell from his numb fingers, clattering loudly against the linoleum. Clack, spin, clack. He collapsed backward, crashing into the kitchen table. The fruit bowl shattered. Oranges rolled across the floor like billiard balls. The apartment was suddenly awake. "May!" Bumpy's voice roared from the bedroom. Moretti lay on the floor, clutching his chest, blood bubbling past his lips. He looked up at the woman in the silk nightgown. The room held its breath. The only sound was the dying man's struggle for air. Mamie stood over him, still gripping the bloody knife. She didn't look like a housewife. She looked like a Valkyrie. What Lorenzo Rizzuto didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson never slept unprotected, even when he appeared to. The shift change gap at 2 a.m.? It was a fabrication. A trap Bumpy had laid months ago, leaking false information to a suspected mole in his organization. 2:18 a.m. Bumpy burst into the kitchen, A45 automatic in his hand. He was wearing silk pajamas, but his eyes were wide awake. He saw the scene instantly. The shattered bowl, the gun on the floor, the dying hitman, and his wife standing tall, shaking now as the adrenaline faded. Mamie, Bumpy breathed, lowering his gun. He stepped over the dying Moretti without even looking at him. He went straight to her, taking the knife from her hand and pulling her into his chest. "I got him, Bumpy," she whispered. "He came in the back." "I know, baby, I know." Bumpy looked down at Moretti. The hitman's eyes were glazing over. Bumpy recognized the face. He knew who sent him. But Bumpy didn't panic. He didn't call the police. He didn't call the ambulance. He walked to the wall phone and dialed a number. "Get the car," Bumpy said into the receiver, "and bring a camera." Bumpy knew that killing the hitman wasn't enough. If Rizzuto sent one, he would send another. He needed to end this war tonight. He needed a psychological weapon. 3:30 a.m. The body was gone. The kitchen was clean. But on the table sat a package wrapped in brown butcher paper. Inside was Moretti's gun and a photograph. The photo was a masterpiece of noir horror. It showed Moretti's body dead on the floor, with Mamie's bloody kitchen knife stabbed into the floorboards next to his head. But the kicker was the object placed in Moretti's dead hand, a receipt from the local butcher shop for one whole chicken. It was Bumpy's message. "You sent a wolf. My wife treated him like poultry. Big Feets drove the package down to the Italian Social Club on Mulberry Street in Little Italy. He threw it through the front window at 4 a.m. When Rizzuto opened that package and saw the photo, he didn't see a threat from a gangster. He saw a humiliation. He had been beaten by a woman with a kitchen utensil. If this got out, if the other families found out his top hitter was taken out by a housewife, Rizzuto would be a laughingstock. His authority would evaporate. October 14th, 9:00 a.m. The silence from the Italian side was deafening. There was no retaliation, no drive-by shootings, no bombs. Lorenzo Rizzuto had been checkmated. He couldn't avenge Moretti without admitting how Moretti died. To admit that a woman had killed his best soldier would be professional suicide in the hyper-masculine world of the mafia. Rizzuto sent an emissary to the Lenox Lounge later that afternoon. The meeting was short. The emissary apologized for the misunderstanding. He claimed Moretti was a rogue agent acting without orders. He offered a peace offering, an extra 10% of the slot machine revenue from East Harlem. Bumpy accepted the deal. He sat at his usual booth, sipping coffee, looking every inch the king. Mamie Johnson was never charged. The police report, filed by a sergeant on Bumpy's payroll, listed the incident as a break-in interrupted, suspect fled. Moretti's body was never found officially. It likely ended up in the foundation of a new construction project in Queens. But the streets knew. The whispers started at the beauty parlors on 125th Street and spread to the pool halls on Lenox. They looked at Mamie differently when she walked to church on Sundays. They stopped seeing just the elegant wife of the boss. They saw the steel beneath the silk. They started calling her the Black Widow of Harlem, not because she killed her husbands, but because if you touched her web, you didn't come out alive. Bumpy's respect for her shifted too. He stopped treating her like a porcelain doll to be protected. He started treating her like a partner. When he eventually went to Alcatraz years later, it was Mamie who held the pieces of his empire together, her reputation as the woman who gutted a hitman serving as a shield no one dared to test. Mamie Johnson's defense of her home stands as a critical moment in the history of the Harlem underworld. It shattered the illusion that mob wives were passive bystanders. It proved that in Bumpy Johnson's world, strength wasn't gendered. It was necessary for survival. This story reveals the depth of the partnership between Bumpy and Mamie. They weren't just husband and wife, they were a unified front. Bumpy provided the power, but Mamie provided the backbone. She was the one person Bumpy could trust implicitly, the one person who would literally kill to protect him. It humanizes the legend of Bumpy Johnson, showing us that his greatest asset wasn't his fists or his intellect, but the woman standing in his shadow with a knife in her hand. The lesson here is timeless. Underestimate the quiet ones at your own peril. Rizzuto looked at a housewife and saw weakness. He failed to see that a woman protecting her family is the most dangerous creature on earth. If you didn't know Mamie Johnson was this savage, you need to subscribe right now. We are uncovering the real history of Harlem they don't teach you in school. Smash that like button if you think Mamie deserves her own movie. And tell me in the comments, if someone kicked in your door at 2 a.m., would you be ready? Next week, the true story of how Bumpy Johnson escaped a police trap at the Apollo Theater. using nothing but a disguise and a jazz band. You don't want to miss it.